Good morning again, Rob. I'm so impressed, always impressed with the caliber of our county commissioners. We have good leadership in this county.
Yeah, we just scratched the surface of some of the things we could have talked about in that segment there, but the Friday is, of course, the morning after the county commission meeting, which you can watch on this TV 10, by the way, if you can't make it to the meetings in person. And it's a timely thing to get them in here on a Friday morning. That doesn't happen often, but we're very happy that Eddie could coordinate with Steve and Gary and come in. And I don't know that I'm still 100% certain as to how this formula is going to work in regards to these data centers and the grids in terms of how the revenue is getting distributed among the states. Every time I think I understand it, somebody changes one of the formula parts of it.
There's two issues with this, Rob, and we talked about one today. We did not talk about the other one. Issue number one is the physical impact it will have on the county. Issue number two is, has there been a overreach by the state? And this I think will probably be decided in the courts. Is it constitutionally legitimately constitutionally? So that's I think we'll find out. So both of these issues, one will be more readily deciphered than the other.
And if it does indeed ever become a court case, fortunately we have a lot of lawyers on staff here on this show, one of whom can never comment on anything because I think Rolls-Royce is involved in every lawsuit in this state. But at least two of them could. Yeah.
And they're not hesitant either, Rob.
No, let's welcome in our Friday Five, which includes the Admiral Bill Stubblefield.
Good morning again, Rob.
And the longest tenured member of our crew. He does work, or at least he used to, for Bowles Rice. He still hangs out and goes to big, important meetings as well. Michael Carl.
Good morning, everybody.
Good to see you.
Well, good to be seen.
How are those?
At my age.
You're younger than Bill.
You're younger.
That's true.
I had Jerry Olson in here yesterday. He's 87. He's now the president of Habitat for Humanity and the Washington Redskins Alumni Association. And he's got you by, what, 10 years, Mike?
Well, I'm 78. I'll be 79 in September.
All right, so you're still a young pup compared to him.
Well, relatively.
He calls you kid when you come in the room. Also, attorney at law Lawrence Schultz.
Great to be here this morning. Good to see everyone.
Telephone, Joseph Joey Torts Ferretti.
You know, Rob, like any smart attorney, Schultz, Carl, and I, we're not going to comment on microgrids and county taxes until we can figure out how somebody will pay us for it.
Is that smart or is that opportunistic, Joe?
That's both.
Either way. And making his premiere on the Friday Five, Mike Allers Jr. He ran for the House of Delegates in the primary. That's the seat Wayne Clark currently holds. Mike, welcome.
Yeah, great to be back.
Been a guest on the show. We had thought we had you as a Friday Five member not too long ago.
Yeah, not too long ago. Not too long ago, but I'm very excited to be back and in the chair.
Well, great to have you here, too. So, Lee, let's get into it now with our leadoff hitter, Mr. Joseph Ferretti. Joe.
Well, Rob, I thought I might change course at the last minute here and talk about that ridiculous spectacle, which is the NFL draft. But I'm going to stay on something more important. There's an interesting case, U.S. Supreme Court case that was argued earlier this week, Mahmoud versus Taylor. It involves one of our neighboring counties, I guess, you can consider them neighbors, Montgomery County in Maryland. Now, folks are familiar with Montgomery County, I'm sure. 160,000 students, 14th largest in the country in terms of student population. The county is considered to be the most religiously diverse county in the country. The parents who are suing in the schools in that case are from a diverse religious organization and comprised of Muslims, Catholics, and Ukrainian Orthodox religions. And what they're arguing is that there are course materials in that county, namely books, that refer to LGBTQ characters and families and family situations. And some of these parents are upset about the fact that their students are being exposed to that. The argument is that this is a freedom of religion issue and that the schools have not accommodated for those students and parents who don't want the students to be exposed to those sorts of course materials. Now, the current state of the law in the country is this. and we've talked about this many times, the mere exposure of different religions, different lifestyles, what have you, in our schools is not illegal. But schools cannot advocate for or coerce students towards certain teachings of a certain religion. They can't say, one religion is favored over another, or they can't in any way advocate that a certain religion, a certain lifestyle, as that bears on religion, that is the appropriate way that we should live our life here in this country. So, admittedly, this has been a difficult line to draw, and there's been numerous cases that have gone up before the U.S. Supreme Court on religious grounds. And so in Montgomery County, we have these books that are a central issue here. And interestingly, the county, Rob, at the beginning allowed for students to opt out when these books were either going to be read aloud or referred to during the instructional periods of the day. However, after 1 year, they changed course, and the school said, we're not going to have opt-outs anymore because it became too much of a burden. Too many students were wanting to leave the classroom, had to be accommodated, had to be put in other classrooms. Another curriculum had to be developed for those students to make use of their time while they were opting out. And the school said, look, it's becoming too much of a hassle. We're not going to allow opt-outs anymore. Well, that prompted the lawsuit, a case that has gone up through the courts. Lower courts, including the Fourth Circuit Courts of Appeal, have decided that the school was correct, that the burdens were too great, and that the students would have to understand that while they're being exposed to this material, it's not being done in a coercive manner. Well, the parents were not satisfied with that, so they appealed all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, which brings us to what happened this week. During the arguments, it became apparent that the Supreme Court is going to break on ideological grounds, and you're probably going to see a 6-3 vote in favor of the parents, which would then compel the schools to allow these opt-outs and to allow these students to go elsewhere when certain course materials were being used in the classroom. So I looking at the case and reading some of the arguments, it's apparent to me that this is easier said than done in terms of accommodating these claims of religious liberty. And I think as a matter of policy, I think it's a good subject for debate because while it may be evident on its surface that, hey, certain religions are not compatible with LGBTQ lifestyles and the students should not be exposed to that, this can be really expanded if the religious liberty is accommodated for to this extent. It could be expanded well beyond what the arguments are in this case. Can you imagine students coming in saying, well, this teacher is an LGBTQ individual, and I don't want my kid instructed by this teacher. Or there's other kids in the classroom who have that kind of lifestyle, and I don't want my child exposed to that. So there could be extensions of the arguments made in this case that could really actually burden the schools to a great extent. So I think the questions are here fairly evident. If the court decides, and I think they will, that religious liberty trumps the concerns of the school in this particular instance with these certain books and certain course materials, is there going to be a concern that this religious liberty claim could be expanded to the point that it paralyzes the schools to such an extent that they're not going to be able to accommodate everybody? We saw this in the vaccines case where the dubious claims of religious freedom were used to avoid vaccine mandates. Well, are we concerned that there's going to be an extension of these arguments elsewhere in the school system? And is it important, perhaps, for the U.S. Supreme Court to narrowly tailor their decision to avoid some of the ramifications of respecting religious liberty arguments in the school setting. That's my concern. That's my question this morning.
All right, let me begin with another attorney here, and Larry Schultz. Mr. Schultz, your thoughts?
Yeah, the first thing that strikes me is since we enshrine freedom of religion in this country, what is to stop some religions from advocating things that go against the Equal Rights Amendment? So, for example, if there were a sect of some religion that believed that black people should not be treated equally, or believed other things that the Constitution requires, could you then say, well, we're simply going to say we can't have our students, there has to be an opt-out for our students when you teach about the Civil War, when you teach about Martin Luther King, when you teach about heroes of American history and heroines of American history who were the embodiment of what our Constitution says. Will that then be an offense to someone's religion? These are public schools. I'm thinking that at some point, if the religious doctrines begin to encroach too far on the basic beliefs of this society, that you're going to get to a point where, from a money perspective, if none other, you're going to have to say to those parents, well, if your religion endorses human slavery, then you're going to have to take your kids to a religious school. If your kids can't tolerate being taught about what our Constitution requires because your religion doesn't believe it, then I think you're going to have to just take them out of the public schools. And I can't imagine why people wouldn't do it. But as taxpayers, you are talking about a tremendous bunch of money. It makes me think back to the conversation you were just having about the schools and how we're going to pay for them. We cannot accommodate every belief that has the word religion attached to it and set up a separate class for those people in every single case. This has the hallmarks of being a real problem going forward.
Mr. Carl.
Well, I think it all has to do with how these ideas are presented. I think there's public schools. It's legitimate to objectively describe these points of view, but the key is that you can't advocate them, and it's like the DEI deal. Those are unquestioned, universally accepted values, but how they're applied or advocated is what's created the problems, that surround that. So that is entirely that's the line. It's what is. I don't think it's improper or unconstitutional to disclose objectively these other these points of view on various things, but you absolutely can't advocate them, and that's the problem.
Joe, is there any context in this court case as to how the course material was being presented? Did Joe mute himself again?
Yeah, he's muted.
I'm sorry, Rob. There was a little mention of it in the arguments. And unfortunately, this is all tied to efforts to get a preliminary injunction. So the court record is not really it's not complete in terms of the factual development here. But the schools did argue, and they did maintain that one of the books was used in a read aloud session. Where students would read passages from a book. It involved a puppy getting lost at a gay pride parade, and there was another mention about not discussion in the classroom, but references to the fact that there was a same-sex couple in a book that had children, and of course, I think it was in an 8th or 9th grade class, and by then I think the students would probably understand that not physically possible to procreate when you're a same-sex couple. So there was discussions about how that came to be, so the students would understand it. But it was nebulous and vague, and it was because the record's not really developed.
And we don't know if the puppy was gay or straight at this time, do we, Joe?
We
He was
no,
lost.
And I'm glad you asked that. That was the first thing that occurred to me, and I'm proud of myself for not bringing it up.
This is why I get paid the small bucks. Sorry. Mr. Stubblefield.
Yeah, I think your operative word, Joe, was how the Supreme Court's going to frame their rule and their decision. This is the opt-out is a lot more modest than what the West Virginia proposed with some of the legislative language a couple of years ago that were just banning everything in total and putting people in jail if they made this exposure. That's not what this Supreme Court decision is addressing. This is addressing only the simple opting out. If a parent chooses not to have the child attend a certain class, they opt out. I would think that could be accommodated, even though the school board says it's more difficult to accommodate it. But that's quite a bit different than some of the conjecture, speculation that we've heard for the last couple of minutes that could extend to much far-reaching historical documents, or a teacher that a parent does not like. Can you opt out of that, going to that teacher's classroom? That could become organically dangerous or destructive. But so that comes back to the point that Joe made. It depends on how the Supreme Court frames their ruling. It could be, if it's tightly framed and addresses this one specific issue, probably it's not a lot of damage, depending on what you interpret damage to be. But it'd have less repercussions than if it's loosely worded and it could extend to don't like a particular teacher.
Mike Gallers Jr.
So, as a former public educator, I'm going to come at this from that angle. In public schools, we don't even have enough staff to accommodate children who don't speak English. So we have usually schools have one or two English language learner teachers assigned to a growing and large population. Public schools don't have the personnel to accommodate. Now, I completely understand if parents, really specifically between K through 5, K through 6, might have a problem with that. But honestly, if we're getting high school, people need to grow up. That's just a fact. And look, this is coming as a Republican here. We can't be, especially because a lot of this argument is going to be sympathetic mostly to Republicans, I would imagine. But we can't be sensitive and call out, people for, cancel culture, and we can't say, facts over feelings, and we can't see a same-sex character in a book. So these things really need to align. And like Larry said, if it's a public school, religion, although we can make this argument and obviously accommodate when it comes to prayer and things like that, but it's a public school. And if you don't want to be in a public school, there's the Hope Scholarship, there's other things accessible to you to go elsewhere, because it is a slippery slope. And I do worry about someone, not wanting to know about the Civil War, not wanting to know about history. But even coming from the other side, I've been in a situation where I simply said as a teacher that Donald Trump was the president, and I got an earful from parents that said that, well, my son can't be in the room if you mention him. That's ridiculous. So as a teacher, we have to watch what we're talking about. But now we can't simply teach. We can't do, we have to walk on eggshells everywhere. And at the same time, protect the classroom and make not even $60K. So something's got to give here.
I kind of like the way that you co-opted that point into teachers' rights. It's very smooth. You can tell this guy's been doing it for a while.
If you want us to step on eggshells, then pay us $100,000.
I'm with you.
Sorry.
Hey, let me ask the obvious question here, and I'm going to guess that at least 5 of the people involved in this conversation grew up in an academic grade school where you just learned information. and it wasn't presented to you as someone who gave it to you as straight or gay or anything else, do we really need the puppy goes to the gay parade in the grade school curriculum? Is that really necessary? I mean, why introduce the controversy when it doesn't seem to be necessary to introduce the controversy?
Well, and it all depends. Like, that story seems ridiculous. But if we're talking about, for example, like a character that might be LGBTQ in like Shakespeare or something like that, then it goes into a bit where, okay, if it's a well-respected text, not one of these new weird
But the good thing about that is that no student on the planet understands Shakespeare, so they wouldn't even know if the character was in any way other than traditional. Go ahead, Joe.
Hey, Rob. Yeah, let me. The school argued this, and I'll look. It's hard to really parse words here, but the school maintained that it is their mission to prepare students for the world that they're going to be a part of.
In third grade,
and how to deal with diverse. Yeah, you could. I agree. You can argue when that is done. In fact, the puppy getting lost in a gay pride parade book, I think, was in a very early primary school setting. So, like first, second, or third grade. So, yeah, I agree. You can argue that seems to be a bit of a stretch.
Yeah. Did you know your sexuality in first, second, or third grade, or even know what that was?
No, I was trying to learn how to tie my shoes.
Sure. That's why they brought Velcro in for a while.
Exactly. But I think, that was the school's argument, was that, look, these kids eventually in life are going to encounter a gay pride parade. And do you want them throwing rocks at those people in the parade, or do you want them understanding why they're out there?
That's a bad argument.
That's the question. But when these kids are exposed to it and all, I think is a very valid concern.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that point there, but by the time you get to high school, you kind of know who's who, right? And you've kind of dealt with it your whole life to that point, leading up to that time. And I went to school with the same kids for the most part from first grade through 12th grade. I mean, there was a little bit of difference when I went from the Catholic school to the public school, but I still know those kids socially on the playgrounds and whatever. And we kind of blended amongst each other and figured stuff out. We didn't need somebody with a book in the classroom to say, that person's gay, get along with them or else. I don't think that was necessary, and I still don't now. Yeah. I especially don't think it's necessary in second or third grade.
No, and as a teacher, if I could jump in, like as a teacher, we need to do a better job of what is taught in the classroom, and there's a way to teach and to indoctrinate, and our job should not be to indoctrinate. The other thing is, I've taught middle school. A lot of these kids are aged up through their phone. So they are talking about things in sixth grade and whatnot, for better or for worse, right?
Sure.
Elementary school, completely off limits, but I think once we get to high school, I think that's a little more, socially acceptable.
Well, going through middle school, that's enough for anybody. Yeah. Joe, final minute is yours. And Larry, you had a quick comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say, one exception to what we've just been talking about is when that third grader has two gay men as his parents, he might be feeling a little lonely. Now, that was not a thing that ever came up as far as I ever knew, but the other kids will know. And to at least say this is the right of the people who do it is to reinforce for that child that, yeah, you do belong here. You do belong in this society. And I realize that's not the goal and the direct plan of the schools, but it could be very helpful to those kids who are feeling on the playground, because, there's one thing you talk about in class and there's another things that get talked about on the playground. And on the playground, that kid deserves to feel welcome too.
30 seconds, Joe. Wrap it up.
Well, I was going to say, as I made notes here, comments by everybody on the panel this morning, I think were spot on. Correct statements of the law and concerns about the burdens of accommodation. The bottom line here is that exposure, I think, is not such a bad thing if it can be accommodated and done at the right time. And it's also in recognition that a lot of kids don't get these lessons at home, which we get back to the problem with parenting. And the schools argue that, if they're not getting it home, they got to get it somewhere. That's a compelling argument too. But
on that note, Joe, we got to get out of here at the top of the hour. This is Talk Radio, WNR Martinsburg and TV 10. Bill Stubblefield, you are on the clock. And up with issue number 2 to lead off the 9 o'clock hour, the Admiral Bill Stubblefield.
Well, Rob, since the start of our country, there's been a tug of war between powers, the Congress and the president. After Watergate, the Congress put more restrictions on the president or the executive branch, and ever since then, there's been an effort to claw back some of that authority. And it's every president has done this to some degree. President Trump seems like he's much more aggressive, trying to claw back as much authority as he can. One issue has been the independent agencies. He's argued that the independent agencies are under the strict purview of the president. He can fire, he can hire, he can eliminate, whatever the case may be. We have the same thing with the universities, withholding money from the universities. He can say that's his power. With those, eliminating large sectors of our civil service population. You can go down list and list and list. And as a resident of the U.S., as a constituent, all of us to some degree take umbrage with when it gets in within our bailiwick, for example. But the one group that seems to at least publicly tolerate what he's doing are our congressmen, our senators and our congressmen. They are the ones that have some power, some authority to tell the President Trump he's gone too far. But they have refused to do that. There's been some, in the case of Senator Capito, with some of the an agency in West Virginia. She has verbally supported the agency, and said that she would be talking to the president, but that was one small group. It does not address the overall reduction in force of other agencies. My question is a speculative question, and more so than anything else, but I think it'd be kind of fun to probe and look at. What will be the tipping point of where our senators say enough is enough, you've gone too far? I can think of two examples. One would be if there's a constitutional crisis that the president ignores the rulings of the court. And we've seen the kind of the edge of that with the prisoners in El Salvador. That has not come to the point yet, but we're moving in that direction. So that'd be one constitutional crisis. The other one would be, and this is a little bit more speculative, is if he made some noise about firing Jerome Powell. Jerome Powell, if that happened, then our economy would go in a tailspin. Would that be enough for our congressmen, our senators, to say, you've gone too far? So the question to my colleagues, what do you view as a tipping point that would cause Congress / the senators to tell the president, back off, you've gone too far?
And Bill, just to say, and this isn't critical of you, but you're assuming that everybody thinks President Trump has gone a little bit too far. There are many who do not think he has.
Point's well taken, Rob. Point's well taken. Exactly right. But there would be certain things, and I'll use constitutional crisis. If he ignored the Supreme Court, I suspect a lot of the people in the country would feel he's gone too far in that.
Let's begin this one with another attorney at law, Mr. Michael Carl.
Well, Trump will certainly generate problems and opposition, to it. But the Congress has the power to make law. Now, the Constitution has allocated some presidential powers, to the president, and the complexity of our government operation is so great that these differing sources of power can come into conflict, and that. But I think that Trump will respect whatever the U.S. Supreme Court rules on the resolution of these disputes that are coming up. I mean, I certainly thought he had a point on the guy, Gales or whatever his name is, who was had been in Maryland. He's not a Maryland person. He's not a U.S. citizen at all. About sending him down to El Salvador, but the question about a district judge, who doesn't have immediate authority over the question to tell the president of the United States, what he can and can't do, is a real question. And so we need the U.S. Supreme Court to have the final resolution of that kind of a question.
It seems like as long as we've been around with district courts, that question would have been brought to the Supreme Court before. It's never been brought before the Supreme Court?
I'm sure that that issue has been latent in cases that have come up before to some degree, but it's not clear cut, mm-hmm. but the idea that we have all these district judges, and any one of them could overrule the president of the United States, whose number one job is to protect America.
Mr. Schultz?
His number one job is to honor the Constitution of the United States. And due process is built in, and it doesn't just apply to citizens, it applies to persons. Antonin Scalia made this very clear, that in the immigration context, that if you are a person, you are entitled to due process of law. Mr. Abrego Garcia was never given due process of law, and that cannot be gainsaid.
And that's a question for the Supreme Court to say. We'll see what they say.
Well, we will. But to answer Bill's question, I believe that the Republican Congress has been reluctant to challenge Trump, and that is not going to change no matter what happens. And so the way that this will change is when there is no longer a Republican Congress. When in 26 the Democrats manage to take back enough seats to have the majority, all of a sudden there will be pushback on a daily basis. I have zero faith that anything Donald Trump does is going to be challenged by the likes of Mike Johnson. I just don't have any faith. He could prove me wrong, be happy to have him prove me wrong, but I don't think it's going to happen.
Mike Allers.
Yeah, I mean, we have to wait till 2026, right? Because there's primaries, there's a lot of things.
No, we don't have to wait. My question is anything that would influence this Congress to push back against?
Well, I think a line too far. First of all, the deportation of gang members, like if anybody, regardless of the law, is sticking up for gang members, like you're losing. Like it's just a political fact. We're not talking legally, just political points on the board. Donald Trump knows what he's doing when it comes to that. I think you will see there would be pushback, though, and he's floated it. I don't think he means it seriously, but he's floated sending American citizens to El Salvador. I do think that would be a red line, that there would be pushback on that. Again, I think he's talking hyperbolically. When it comes to the Supreme Court, though, we've been here before. Andrew Jackson said, okay, the Supreme Court ruled, let them enforce it. So he does have a precedent for it. This has happened. Trump's relationship with the Supreme Court, I don't think is unique. But it all depends on, even in the case of this Maryland man, you're right, he wasn't a citizen. Even though Scalia, a great conservative, did say that due process and everything applies to this, I do believe it is, regardless of party, regardless of who is in office, if the president feels like he is protecting the American people against, gangs and things like that, I do think it is under the commander-in-chief's power to get rid of those enemies. Now, Supreme Court I hold in higher esteem than the district court judge. I do think there's an argument under the unitary executive theory that district courts could be brushed away.
My question was, are there other red lines? Are there red lines that would cause the Republican Congress to push back against the president?
At this time, I mean, I potentially the talk of the third term, if he was really serious about that, potentially, right? Because you will see a Trump-Obama rematch if that happened, right? But I do think at this time, the Republicans, if I'm thinking politically, you just sit and wait till 2026. You don't want to get primaried right now. They can't afford to lose any, majority. So right now, Trump does have the leverage.
Joe Ferretti.
Bill, with a Republican Congress that has proved to be remarkably accommodative, I have difficult time singling out one issue that's going to be a tipping point for them. However, I think history will be a guide here. The Democrats started running away from Joe Biden when his polling numbers tanked, and he became a drag on the members of Congress, their political fortunes in terms of their own election. So I think a tipping point, perhaps, as superfluous as it may be polling numbers. The polling numbers that President Trump currently has are trending in the wrong direction. And I suspect they may get worse when store shelves start turning up empty because we don't have any Chinese goods flowing into the country. And you can't order a bunch of stuff on Amazon. And prices of what we do have on the shelves start going up because the tariffs eventually take hold on the economy. When that happens and the polling numbers of the president tank, which is a real risk going forward, I think you're going to see pushback develop with the Republicans in Congress, much like it did with the Democrats when Joe Biden had similar problems in polling. And I think that may be the tipping point.
Back to you, Bill.
Yeah, I think Mike's point, I think, is a good point. I think Joe's point's a good point. I think there'll be a reluctance on the part of the Republican Congress to take any pushback action because of the threat of being primaried. I think that's very valid. I think Joe's also right on target when he says the poll numbers start tanking, all bets are off.
All right, we move on to issue number 3, and for that, Mr. Mike Allers Jr.
All right, so interesting thing coming out of the West Virginia House. So House Bill, 2 bills regarding education, personal favorite subject of mine. House Bill 2755 has the state superintendent now reporting to the legislature, and House Bill 2548 would require the State Board of Education to report rules to legislative oversight. Now, I do think this is kind of a consolation prize, a step in the right direction to remember Amendment 4 failed. I do think it's necessary because every state agency does report to the legislature, and in other states this happens as well. I do think our education crisis stems from a lack of direct involvement. I will say, though, and I'd like to pose this to you guys, is this state legislature who was not able to deliver all of the governor's personal wins with a supermajority, the right people to have this legislative oversight? Because education, as we've seen from this session, does not seem like a real priority. We're 50th in education, and I don't see anything coming out of the legislature that plans on turning that around.
Let's make this a 2-part question then. Is that the right move by the legislature? Some call it overstepping, to make the Board of Education accountable to them. And is this the right House of Delegates and State Senate to make them accountable? Bill, you go first.
Yeah, great question, Mike, and one that I wrestle with a great deal. What scares me about this particular legislature, I think they, at least on the Senate side, they can be culturally driven. And if we make this as a partisan partisan control, which is quite possible, then we're going to be at the whim of the legislators. We can make our education system needs to be somewhat independent from the partisan, especially if the partisans is hard over one way or the other. And I think there's some risk there. Our education is not working, and as demonstrated by, we've been ranking near the bottom for many, many, many years. What do we need to do? I've been advocating for quite a while that the legislators needs to form a blue ribbon panel to look at our education system from top to bottom and to do a critical review of what is working and why we're not working. There's been some reluctance to do that. They fall back upon the excuse, well, it's the State Board of Education that has that responsibility, not ours. So now what are they doing with one of the bills? They're bypassing it altogether and saying, no, it's our control. But still, we have not had this thorough let's get to the kernel of the problem review that I think is critical. That would be my first step before I go to answer your question, is it a good thing or a bad thing? We have not done this thorough review.
Do you think this is the right House and Senate makeup to carry this out, though, Bill?
Yeah, I do, because a review is going to, if it's done correctly, and I think they would do it correctly, you'd have representatives from several demographics. You'd have the schools, other sectors, perhaps other states that have been very successful. You'd have the more moderates. You'd have the more progressives, more conservative. You could have membership represented on a blue ribbon committee that would take all of these things into consideration. What we're doing, though, we're floundering. We are saying we want to make changes, but we really don't know what is working and what is not working. There's a tremendous amount of speculation of what is not working, but I don't think it's based upon anything other than emotional reaction. And so I think we do need a committee. I've been saying this for quite a while. It's fallen on deaf ears. I suspect it'll continue to fall on deaf ears, but to me, that is step one.
Mike Carl.
Well, I think these efforts are positive. Stubblefield's made some good points, but I think in general we need to shift the input of the legislature to a stronger level. And the main reason is the teachers union is the biggest problem that West Virginia has had in forever. And I think it's a direct responsibility of the teachers union and their lack, they're playing the games they play to hold back improvements in the schools. And that's why our schools are low rank.
Mike, hold your comments to the end there. I want to get through the panel first. Joe Ferretti.
Well, Mike, the only thing I would say is that there's teacher unions elsewhere in the country and some school districts that are doing quite well. So I don't know if there's something unique about the teacher union in West Virginia that you cite to, but I don't know if that's the main source of the problem. But can we acknowledge the sea change that has taken place here with regard to the schools and governance of the schools? It used to be that progressives look to the state and look to the state and federal governments for national standards and imposing certain rules and guidelines on schools. And it was the conservatives who said, oh, no, local control, local governance, that's what's best. Now there seems to be a complete reversal where the conservatives are running to state legislatures and the federal government and saying, hey, please help us with the schools. And it's the progressives that are resisting that and arguing local governance is best. So it's kind of interesting that has developed over time. But bottom line here is that let's remember this amendment was just 3 years ago. It failed 58 to 42. The West Virginia residents spoke and said that they did not want the legislature actively involved in managing the schools. But here we are. The legislature has saw fit to do it. I'm going to tread lightly on this subject because the owner of this radio station was instrumental in passing that legislation. But the bottom line here, I think it's a matter of some debate. And like Bill stated, I do fear that sometimes the legislature is prone to a little bit of overreach here, and that would be my main concern.
Larry Schultz.
Yes. If I had to identify the single biggest problem experienced by West Virginia educators and students, it is a two-word phrase that I learned as a kid, chump change. We don't have enough money to run a proper school system. Our per pupil expenditures are way below, and they tend to match our placement as an educational provider. The legislature doesn't need to have control of the State Board of Education or more control of this, that, or the other. All they need to do is allocate more funds and make us competitive with other states. You never talk to a teacher, very seldom, maybe if they moved here with a family member who got a better job here. Nobody's sitting in Maryland or Pennsylvania or Virginia and saying, boy, I really wish I could break in to be a West Virginia educator because they make so much money. It's going the other way, and it has for the whole time I've been associated with this issue, 30, 40 years. And so the legislature, rather than taking over the schools, could take over its own job, which is to fund the schools responsibly. And they're not doing it. I don't see that changing, regardless of whether you have a state board of education running everything or the legislature running everything. And therefore, the problem will not be fixed.
Mike Allers, back to you.
All right. So, yeah, I will say, you know, a lot of people go after the teachers' unions, but when it comes to, you brought up Maryland, you brought up Pennsylvania, those are union states, and they're kicking our butts. So, and we are now a right-to-work state, so effectively our unions are toothless. So they don't have the power that they did 50 years ago. But most union states are way higher than us when it comes to education. The only exception really being right-to-work state in Florida. But Ron DeSantis actually had to kind of think outside the Republican box. He actually funded, he gave like teachers 10, 15 grand raises. He created an incentive program. There was buy-in to recruit better teachers. And he did make the legislature more invested in a curriculum, but they had to rebuild the curriculum. So I do think a lot of legislators like to blame unions but they don't do anything themselves. They don't care to really know how schools work. They don't care. We keep hearing, well, local control, that's how we're going to get higher pay. That's not working. That hasn't worked. And it's not coming anytime soon, so we have to think of a better way. Arkansas, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, she injected the average teacher there was making $35,000. Now they're making $60,000 because she found the funds. We have the funds somewhere. We can properly do it, but we're losing teachers to Virginia, to Maryland, and we're not invested in our curriculum. Now, when it comes to local control, real quick, local control, I do feel has been a problem because Jefferson County went with a program called Amplify. And Amplify is out of Brooklyn, which is an incredibly kind of leftist bent of a curriculum. And it requires the teachers to read out of a book and barely teach. So they have to read basically a script. That's not teaching. And that actually justifies you paying someone a lower salary. So local control isn't always best, but if they want the responsibility, the legislature does, then they need to step up to the plate and actually know what's going on in their schools.
All right, Mike, thank you. Mr. Schultz and Mr. Carl, you're on the clock. And how about a round of applause for Mike Allers Jr. making his debut with his first point there. Hey, good job, Mike.
Thank you.
You're not allowed to applaud for yourself, though. That's for both.
I have to.
The Wall Street Journal reports that federal spending is far higher in the first months of the Trump administration than it was in the same period of 2023 and 2024 under Joe Biden. Is this early data a source of concern for Republicans who elected a man who had bankrupted 6 casinos?
What I love about Larry is he's got it doesn't matter what it could be a Mother's Day greeting. He find a way to throw in there something about Trump bankrupting a casino.
Well, what he's counted by Mike Carl with Biden, so they balance out.
Bankruptcy lawyers could set up things like food trucks in the lots of casinos to get the customers who come out broke and say, I need to file bankruptcy. I spent too much time at the casino. But until Donald Trump came along, I really never heard of the casino itself going bankrupt. They bankrupt other people sometimes, or people bankrupt themselves, availing themselves of the work. So to me, it's like a remarkable achievement. And he did it 6 times. So,
all right. So your question is again?
Yeah, my question is this a concern, the fact that federal spending is actually up in the first 3 months of the Trump term over the comparative from the last 2 years?
It might be over defending lawsuits. You lawyers cost a lot of money, Mike Carl.
Well, even if I accept the accuracy of your assertion about this, there's a legitimate question about it because you know the whole thing about federal spending and the information about the operation of the federal government is very, very unreliable in terms of the source of it and the agenda from the people that put it out and everything else. So, but you know, even if it's actually true, Donald Trump is initiating a lot of important reforms for the federal government, and he's, first of all, if any part of that was to better protect the border that Biden opened up for millions of bad illegal entries, then that's a good thing. And I think possibly to the extent that this statement about how much is spent is true, to the extent it relates to that, it's more power to you.
And this is a Wall Street Journal article, you said, Larry?
Wall Street Journal article, yes.
All right. Is there a date you can reference?
Within the last 2 weeks.
All right. Mr. Ferretti.
Well, implicit in Larry's question is, does the GOP, which is currently in power, do they care a whit about government spending? And I think they've proven in the past that they don't, and I think they're going to prove again that they don't, because they have a math problem here. They want to extend the Trump tax cuts from 2017, and that at a cost of $4.5 trillion over 10 years. And they somehow have to square that with cuts that they claim that they want to make to government spending. Yet the budget that was passed by the House contains no specific cuts. In fact, it includes increases in spending for defense and for border security to the tune of $300 billion in increased spending. So on top of the $4.5 trillion that we're going to be missing, how are they going to make this work? I find it interesting that those budget hawks that are so front and center during Democrat administrations seem to have gone in hibernation. You don't hear from them now about government spending and the need to reform spending and things like that. Everything's being done by executive order. Nothing is coming from Congress, which, if I read my Constitution correctly, is the one that appropriates funds and comes up with a budget. So when we get back to the question that Bill posed earlier about the abdication of the GOP in Congress, this spending issue and what's going to be developing going forward, I think is going to prove once again that the GOP does not care about spending.
Mike Allers Jr.
So I have to agree with Mike here when it comes to it. It depends, I think, on the context of things. So if Trump is spending money to, and we don't have an exact figure right now, but if he's spending money to clean up what Biden did when it comes to, illegals coming across the border, when it comes to paying, I think, what was the cost? In New York City, it was like $65,000 per migrant. So, or something like that. When it came to like food, housing, in total, like Eric Adams gave a stat where it was like $65,000 per migrant. That's a lot of money. So if we are paying for the reallocation of those people, sending them back, securing our border, that could explain the spike. So I will defend the Trump administration when it comes to that. What we start getting at, though, is if we see spending increase, right? And let's say if Doge is supposed to be doing what they're doing, if we don't see any result from Doge, then I do think that is a question for 2026. So at the same time, we could be increasing our spending to fix what the Biden administration did. But if we don't see these dividends come in, or okay, if there's all this government waste, why isn't this money going back into the government and capping our debt?
Bill.
Yeah, a couple of things. Joe, you mentioned that the House was being irresponsible. I think it's actually the Senate. The Senate's the one that has not identified any spending cuts, and they could increase the budget by something like $5.5 trillion. But regardless, one of the two bodies is showing no regard at all about the debt. The other question is, and dismissing the casinos, Larry, the fact that it spiked in first 3 or 4 months of Trump's administration. Unless I know more about it, it's hard to address that. This is a Biden budget still. So what they're doing is within the Biden budget. And did the Wall Street Journal break down this this spike in spending?
Not that I saw. They were simply using Treasury data to track the amount of money the federal government was spending. And, it's fairly straight up data that says here's how much we spent on Tuesday and here's how much we spent on Wednesday.
But
so
then I'll fault any network for not doing the analysis and just throwing out a number that is not defensible. It's hard to really accept.
I guess what I would say is what's not defensible is running for office about all these great cuts that Elon Musk is going to bring you and sending him in there, bringing in a tiny fraction of those cuts, plus you have the associated costs. You don't just get to, this isn't a sub shop, this is the United States government. You don't get to just say, okay, you're fired, get out, and it doesn't cost you anything. When a federal employee leaves, there's a lot of administrative and other costs that are involved in, and when you make them go back to their office, there's a whole bunch of administrative costs.
Yeah, but those costs, GAO can project those ahead, so you should have some idea. But what is not projected ahead on this are the intellectual costs that we're going to suffer.
Oh,
and I think that dwarfs any financial cost.
I agree. The reason I raise this issue is because I constantly hear from Republicans about how crucial it is to control government spending, and here we are, less than 100 days in, and it's already going up. If they then extend these tax cuts, despite the sort of, in my view, fanciful dynamic that it's going to produce some boatload of revenue, we'll get the surprising result that this president, who ran the 4-year record for budget deficits, is going to break his own record.
There was a story this morning about Doge, which I believe is the biggest waste of time and taxpayer money that they could have come up with, especially the way they're implementing cuts. I mean, you don't need Elon Musk to go in and wipe out a department. They could have done that without bringing anybody on and paying them money. Because that's the way these cuts have gone. It's just that department, get rid of it, and then we'll figure out what they did later. So they were hoping to save, Musk had projected $2 trillion. And the story this morning said the realistic savings ultimately is going to be $100 billion. You could save what is it? The people that they fired, the inspector generals, they were saving close to that every year on their own. I believe the average savings a year with the inspector generals that were in place was about $78-80 billion. So if what Musk does is save $100 billion, and you have all this turmoil and inefficiency that ensued from it, and we're still calling Musk a genius at the end of this story? They're having blow-ups in the White House now between each other. Musk is involved in yelling at about everybody you can imagine. And now he's going to go back and he's going to address Tesla because his stock is sunk by 50%. How is this efficient for anybody, even him?
Yeah, and
he's now one of the most hated men in the world.
Another point, Rob, we're talking about inefficiency. We tend to look at the inefficiency today, and I think it's been horribly done. But going back to the point Larry and I had, I'm more concerned about what's going to happen tomorrow. We have destroyed the infrastructure on so many organizations, the intellectual, the universities, the science agencies, NOAA, for example, with the weather forecast. You've got USAID, you've got National Science Foundation, NIH, all of these that give us the seed corn for the advances of the future. They have been decimated. So I think the inefficiencies, if we look at today, it's going to be a problem, a check mark. But if we look at the inefficiencies for tomorrow, there's going to be a whole page of check marks.
Larry, final thought is yours, then we go to Mike Carl.
Sure. All the talk is about waste, fraud, and abuse. I'm not sure about waste and abuse, but fraud is a crime. Give me a list of the cases they've filed. Pam Bondi's the new Attorney General. When is this going to be United States versus Smith for fraud? In the obtaining and spending of government funds. That's simply not a thing. They're just saying it because waste, fraud, and abuse, why everybody opposes that. They don't have any fraud. They've identified zero fraud up to now. Now, could a better person than Elon Musk maybe find some? I'm sure they could. It's a pretty big outfit. But they don't have anything like that.
Issue number 5, Michael Carl.
I'm going to just add to the last one. The fact is, the truth is that because of Trump's broad-based income tax rate cuts, we had a growth of federal revenue. Now, the terrible, overspending was, virtually controlled by COVID and toward the end of his administration. But going back to Musk now, my question is, why haven't any of the leading Democrats criticized the physical attack and destruction of Tesla vehicles and dealerships? And the my answer is because it was an attack on Musk and they supported it. Tell me they didn't.
Bill's a Tesla owner. Bill?
Yeah, I was going to answer the question January the 6th, Mike. How many people, Republicans, protested what happened on January the 6th? The analogy is the same.
Or the pardons that took place
thereafter.
Or
the pardons that took place thereafter.
Larry Schultz?
Yeah.
The Democrats are as bad as the Republicans. Is that your point?
I think, Mike, I don't put any difference in that.
Yeah, actually, I don't agree, because on January 6th, they beat police officers with sticks and injured them. Under our Constitution and in our culture, property damage is one category, and beating people half to death with sticks is another category. And so the suggestion that somehow these people who did the wrong thing when they damaged Teslas and when they damaged Tesla dealerships, that these people are exactly the same as terrorists who killed people, that's simply ridiculous. It's overstated, way overstated. Should they go to jail for damaging property? Yes, they should. It's a part of our system, and they should go to jail. A good number of them are going to jail. What's not going to happen is a Democratic president is not going to come along and pardon them. But Mr. Trump pardoned the people who beat those police officers on the lawn of the Capitol.
Mike Allers Jr.
Yeah, well, I mean, a Democrat, I think, would tolerate, obviously, remember the summer of love in 2020, not equating that to January 6th, but I do think Democrats would be tolerant of that. Circling back, if we talk about the midterms and government spending, I think you raised it earlier, what's it going to take for the Republicans to come at odds with Trump? I don't think it's going to be Trump. I think it's going to be Elon Musk. And I think there is a correlation between Trump's poll numbers right now and Elon Musk, and I would advise the president to, I think, part as friends with Elon Musk. I understand that he's a financial asset, but, Elon Musk and Trump are not ideologically in line. Elon Musk is in line with Javier Milei of Argentina, who was just kind of slashing and burning, and right now there's a huge wealth inequality in Argentina. He's not the best fit for Trump and his, populist movement. And right now, I think it's best for Trump to, especially when it comes to spending, he needs to, I think, part ways with Musk, and he needs to focus on the American people. I think we should note that it's interesting that a part of Trump's reform, Trump's team right now is suggesting tax raises on the wealthy, which I think is an interesting plot twist. And I'm for it. I'm one of those populist Republicans that think that especially these corporate liberals have gotten away with murder for far too long, and I'm not opposed to it. So I think the energy should be focused there. I think that's where Trump's going to do the best with people and stay out of the other stuff.
Joe Ferretti.
Mike Carl, I'm going to agree with you. I think the Democratic Party is adrift. I think it's lacking in leadership. And I think a smart Democrat looking at the abysmal poll numbers that the party has, a party that now is essential for opposition to much of what Trump is trying to do, I think that the leadership is sorely missing. And I think we're going to see a turnover. The days for Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer are over. Dick Durbin announced that he's not going to run for re-election. He's been in the Senate for decades. He's the party whip in the Senate. So these folks need to go. And new leadership needs to come to the fore, and they need to recognize that certain things, certain stances need to be taken, including criticizing and condemning willful destruction of property. These are open doors for a Democratic Party to step through, but it's going to take leadership to recognize that, and you got to hope it's coming.
You know, excuse me, Joe, this is a great point, and I'll say this. I saw President Trump's polling numbers had dipped to 46%, and his job approval, I think, went down to 43, which is as low as it's been since his first term when he hit 42%.
And his economy, 36%.
36%.
Yeah.
But that still destroys the Democratic approval numbers, which are at 25%. The Democratic Party approval numbers in the face of all that are at 25%.
And
Put that in perspective for what's going on around the world right now. They're at 25%.
And a lot of them are refusing to acknowledge that they did anything wrong. Like that, there's this whole like dark woke movement where they're like, let's be jerks and let's cuss, let's say all these insulting things, and it's not going to work. I do think actually the guy that's going to cut through this. There's two people that I see on the Democratic side. It's going to be either Wes Moore or Josh Shapiro. And these seem to be men that are kind of running away from the party.
Wes Moore said he's not running for president. He's going to seek a second term in Maryland.
I don't believe that. He will seek a second term. But I do think, Wes Moore was like almost created in a lab. Like, right? Like if you're a Democrat, like he hits all the points. Josh Shapiro is another smart one, but it's going to take somebody who is basically kind of running away from the brand of the party right now.
How about Bashir at Kentucky?
I like him. I just don't think I like him. I'm a Republican. I like his temperament. Let me correct that. I don't like his policies. But compared to like AOC, of course, he's the better alternative, right?
Well, speaking of AOC and Bernie Sanders are going around the country on speaking tours. That's not what the face of the Democratic Party needs to be in the next election.
But
those are the two worst Democrats you want talking for you.
But I think AOC...
Oh, he's an independent.
I think AOC, though, goes after Chuck Schumer's seat. I think that's the next move for her.
The Democratic Party needs to keep her out of the picture.
Exactly
Yes.
right. Yep.
Mike, final 30 seconds are yours.
I'll give the Democrats a little free advice. Advocate positively for the free enterprise system.
Well, that's the truth, Mike. That's a fact. That's what's gotten them in trouble. And the Republican Party has co-opted the unions that used to be the Democratic stronghold. Unions are in favor of tariffs. They love tariffs. And that's the Trump point right now.
It's going to keep Trump with Michigan.
Yeah. Hey, final thoughts. Everybody gets 8 seconds apiece when we return after this final 2-minute break. Final seconds, 8 seconds apiece there. Joe, go right ahead.
Well, sadness with the Pope passing. Certainly, I hate to see that.
Larry Schultz.
Be careful. There's a lot of pollen out there this weekend, but still get outside, enjoy yourself.
Go ahead, Bill.
I'm going to echo the latter part of Larry. Enjoy the weekend. It's going to be beautiful. Even with rain, it's going to be
Even
beautiful.
with the pollen. Mike Carl.
The Cards were tied for last with the Pirates, except for just a brief few hours, but the Pirates lost again.
Mr. Allen.
Education needs to be the number one issue in West Virginia, period, full stop.
Good stuff. Thanks, panel. Have a great weekend. Dave Ramsey Show is next. This is Talk Radio, WR Martinsburg and TV 10. We'll talk to you again in 70 short hours.